this week's video, we're going to talk all about color temperature. We're going to talk about what warm and cool colors are and how you can use them to create a sense of space in your paintings and how you can use them to create a sense of mood as well. So if that's of interest to you, stick around. Hey everybody, I'm Brian McCormick and this is Gallery Bry, where every week I'll help you master alla prima oil painting without using harmful solvents or mediums. So if that's of interest to you, stick around, hit that subscribe button, and let's do some painting. For this week's painting, we're going to be using two yellows. We're going to be using yellow ochre and cadmium yellow. We're also going to be using Venetian red, which is a very desaturated iron red. We're going to be using Prussian blue. We're going to be using burnt umber, and we're going to be using titanium white. We're going to be using three brushes for this painting. We're going to be using an angled bright, which is really great for getting some detail and some broader strokes. We're going to be using a long flat, which is also really good for getting details and big broad strokes. And we're also going to be using a filbert as well. I use one for the dark values, one for the midtones, and I use one for the light values. This way, you don't have to wash your brushes all the time while you're painting. Just wipe them down and you'll be good to go. All right, everybody. So the first thing I want to talk about here is this little thumbnail sketch that I have here. I really only use this to identify my paintings and my videos, but they're really helpful to do prior to starting your painting because they can help you work out compositional elements before you jump into a larger painting. So it just saves you time, effort, headaches, materials if you're able to work out your composition prior to getting into your painting. It makes it a much more enjoyable process. Now what I'm doing right now is just putting in a rough rule of thirds. I have another video that I'll put down in the description, or you can just go onto my channel and look at the other videos. It'll be one of my earlier videos and you can see how you can draw the rule of thirds without using a ruler or any measuring devices. Now, because it's a landscape, I don't worry about exact position of the rule of thirds. I just kind of eyeball it. But if you're doing a portrait, you might make that a little bit more exact. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just drawing in my composition with burnt umber. I like to do this because one, it dries very quickly and it helps me map out the composition. It's kind of like a larger thumbnail. I can work out any things that I need to do prior to start putting in color in thick paint. So this is very thin, and now I'm mixing a dark color so that I can go ahead and work in some of my darker shadows. I like to work dark to light because once you start getting titanium white in your mixtures, or if it gets in your brush at all, it's very, very difficult to get that out of there and to keep your darks very dark. Now, I tend not to really clean my brushes whenever I paint. It's because I work in a very specific order and I don't necessarily have to. Typically, all I'll do is wipe my brushes down, and I use a couple brushes for lights, darks, and midtones, and that enables me to really refrain from washing my brushes. It saves the brushes and it saves time and it makes more efficient painting. So here, as you can see, I've mixed a couple pools of color. One of the things I'm going to mention is that I typically like to organize my pools of color based on lights, darks, midtones, sometimes warm and cool. I don't haphazardly really mix on my palette, although it's not always going to be completely orderly, but I try to have a system. That's kind of the main takeaway here. Try to have a system of how you organize your pools of color so that it's easier to work with and it enables you to know exactly where everything is, and you can go back and reuse those pools of color and add to them. That's really kind of the important point. So that was just a little bit of a side note, but now I want to talk about color temperature because that's why you guys joined in today. So right now I'm painting in the mountain in the background, and you can use color temperature to create space and distance in your paintings. And the reason that this happens is because the atmosphere filters out the longer wavelengths like reds and yellows and oranges, and it allows the more high energy wavelengths like purples and blues to get through the atmosphere. So the blues and the purples are what are able to punch through the atmosphere and get to you. And that's why even a green mountain can look blue or purple off into the distance. And then as you get closer, things will tend to appear warmer. They will appear a little bit more yellow, a little bit more red, orange, and it's not always the case, but it's kind of a general rule that as things get closer, they'll be a little bit warmer. Now, you'll notice here that I'm painting the sky yellow. Now, the sky is usually blue, but you can use color temperature to create a mood in your painting. So if I'm painting the sky yellow, it's going to create an idea that this is maybe later in the day, maybe during golden hour, and it'll create a little bit different of a feel than if it was a bright blue sky. You're going to have a feeling that it's a bright sunny day, and maybe it's midday, whereas right now it has a little bit more of a feel that it's later in the day, that maybe the sun is setting, maybe the sun has set behind that mountain. And you can see some of the warmer tones that I'm putting in here as well in the foreground. Now, another thing to mention, just as a side note, you can create space and distance using values. So you'll notice that the mountain is much lighter than the trees. So things that are off in the distance are going to be much lighter in value. Oftentimes, it's not a complete rule. And things that are in the foreground will be much darker. And that is, again, because the atmosphere filters out light. So things in the distance are going to appear much lighter, and they're also going to have less contrast. So the light and shadow contrast in the distance is going to be a lot closer together. Your values aren't going to be as far apart, whereas light and shadow in the foreground can be very stark and have a very high contrast. Now, one of the things that you guys will notice is in my mixing pools over here, I'm adding to the same pools. Oftentimes, I don't create a lot of new mixing pools for every single color mixture that I make. And the reason that I do this is because it helps create color harmony. Because I use a limited palette, if I'm putting a little bit of yellow, red, blue into every mixture, then that enables all the different parts of the painting to talk and communicate. And you can do that by adding to each color pool. And it also helps to build thicker paint. So when you start a mixture, it might be thinner, but if you keep adding to it throughout the course of the painting, it will naturally get thicker. And the reason this is helpful is because when you're painting alla prima, it is helpful to paint from thin to thick because it enables you to layer the paint much more easily. Ideally, you want to try and tile your paintings, kind of like paint by numbers, so that you lay in a clean color, leave it there, move on to the next area. But you're not always able to do that, and you might have to layer some paint. In that situation, painting thin to thick is very helpful. So right now I'm just putting in some warmer highlights because it is a way to create that mood. So maybe these warm highlights are coming from the sky, creating that feeling of a evening. So right now I'm putting in my signature, and I just scratch that in with the back of my brush. Let me know down in the comments how you guys sign your paintings. Do you scratch it in with your brush or a palette knife, or do you sign it with a liner brush? I'd be really eager to hear, so comment below and I'd love to hear from you. Hope you enjoyed this week's tutorial on color temperature. If you want to see more videos like this every week, you can tap this round subscribe icon right here. And if you want to see another video right now, you can tap this box right here. So I hope you're doing well, and we'll see you next week.